I'm going to share lessons from the past. And this is the long, long past, not the recent past. But it's something that we can appreciate very much today. The nation of Israel, when they were living in Egypt, was a homeless nation. They had left the region that God had directed them to because of a famine. And they went to live in Egypt because there was food there. And Joseph had organized so that they would be well taken care of. But after Joseph passed away and they decided they were just going to hang out because it was a nice place to live, well, in essence, they were homeless. And that problem became even more acute when the nation of Egypt looked at this large group of people and said, we have problems here. They won't leave. And they were worried about their own political stability because you had different cultures there. And they were living on equal footing. And so they made the entire nation workers or slaves. Slaves are simply, in that sense, they're workers without pay. However, they seem to appreciate that more than after when God had taken them out of that land. Let me explain. And I'm going to use a dietary example. I've been asked to follow an eating practice. They don't call it a diet, an eating practice. And the only things I'm supposed to eliminate, and I'll summarize it, is sugar and carbs. I think about that. I'm not supposed to eat sugar and carbs. What's left? Judy puts this nice carrot in front of me. Go to town, she says. Have fun. The reality is we love variety, don't we? When I was growing up, we could know which day of the week it was by the food that we ate. For example, Sunday we had roast. And I've said this before. My mother was very religious because every Sunday we had burnt offering. And she didn't mind me telling that. And then on Tuesday, we had pancakes. Every Tuesday was pancakes. And sometimes we were fortunate enough to have sausages with the pancakes. Thursday night was beans and wieners. You remember that? Some of you do. And Friday, some people celebrate it by having fish on Friday. And Judy and I have pizza on Friday night. And we stare at a picture of a fish. And I hope I'll catch one. I've been out fishing for the last 2 weeks with my brother-in-law. He's caught 5. And out of the group of us, we caught 5 fish. You do the math. While the Israelites were living in Egypt, even when they were slaves, they had a varied diet. When they had food, they would have different types of meat, and then they would have different types of vegetables. And there was a good variety of vegetables in Egypt at that time. They were cucumbers, radishes, cabbage, onions. Anybody use onions in cooking? Garlic, you like garlic? So they would season their food with different types of spices and have different vegetables to go with it. And then they could have dessert as well too. And there were different kinds of fruits back then. Dates, figs, pomegranates, melons, grapes, and of course, honey. Doesn't everybody love honey? What's the main ingredient in honey? Thank you very much, Ed. Sugar. There was a dessert, and I was looking up the ancient desserts. It sounds pretty good. There was a dessert called, and listen to the word, Ali. And it sounds just the way it tastes. It was Egyptian bread, and it was soaked in milk. And they added sugar and nuts, and then they would bake it and serve it. Ali, that's good. I remember going to a Mediterranean restaurant, and we had eaten beyond our capacity. I don't know if you've ever done that before. Eaten beyond the healthy capacity, and you're sitting there hating yourself for it. And we were sitting there, and then the maitre d' comes over and he goes, "You have to try our bread pudding." My first thought was, I haven't got any room for it. And then he brings us over 2 big bowls of this. It was so good. We painfully made room. It was an Egyptian dish, they said. Very, very good. It was. It was very good. So they had this variety. Now think about it. And you wonder why there were a lot of complaining that was going on when they were in the desert, being freed from slavery. Sounds wonderful. But this is what would happen. "Mom, what's for breakfast?" "Manna." "Oh. How about lunch?" "Manna." "Oh. What's supper?" "Manna." "Did you want a bedtime snack?" Guess what it was? Manna. "What's for Friday?" "What's Friday?" Manna. Every day for 40 years. They ate what? Manna. Now, manna was described as food from heaven. And God had promised the Israelites this. He said, "I'm going to take care of you for the entire 40 years that you're in the desert. I will give you food that will nourish your body." Leave it at that. There were no onions and garlic to go in with the manna, because think about it. You're in the desert. You're wandering around. We have a desert here in Manitoba, don't we? I've been there. I didn't see a lot of people growing crops there. I didn't see people raising goats and pigs and chickens and all that there either, because it's not the kind of environment that you can raise crops and animals. So guess what you had to eat on Sunday? It was roast. Help me out. Manna. We like variety, don't we? We like variety in our food. I love going home on a Friday night and thinking, "Oh, we're going to have pizza tonight. This is so wonderful." Have you ever had pizza with cauliflower dough? It's not bad. I'm getting used to it. There were a lot of complaints, and I know why, because they were fed up with the food and they were taking it out on each other. Instead of arguing about money, they were arguing about food. So food defines our week. It defines us sometimes too. I remember once I went to visit a friend of mine who was in the hospital, and I had to laugh. She was being brought her supper, and I was there to help her eat her supper. And I'm looking at this plate, and it's all one level, because it's all been pureed. And there was a green section here, and there was a white section there, and there was a gray section. And I was thinking that this is peas with potatoes and some kind of a meat, but it's all pureed. And I started giving her her food, and after a couple of bites, she looked at me and she goes, "I really don't feel hungry. Why don't you eat it?" I understood her completely at that time. You see, God promised to take care of it. And He promised also that He wanted them to learn. He wanted them to grow. And the thing about learning and growing is this, very simply put. You don't grow unless you're under pressure. And I know that you might hate to hear that, but you don't grow unless you're under pressure. And that is a fact of life. Also, we can relate to the monotony of the same food. Because over the last few years, when we were going through the lockdowns and all of the other issues, we were plagued continuously by the sameness of yesterday. How many times did you get up thinking, what day is this today? Because you did the same thing that you did the day before, the day before, the day before, the day before. The sameness of yesterday. It's tiring. And it's understandable when we get frustrated, because there was a lot of anxiety that was going around, plus, of course, this idea of the monotony of what wasn't going to change. And I remember this very clearly. This one stands out in my mind. Last November 2021, and they had eased the restrictions. And many of us were excited because we could get together again. And we were looking forward to a Christmas Eve service here. And big plans were being made, and things were put into place, and practices were being done. And then the inevitable happened, right? they made the announcement, lockdown. And I remember talking to people and catching the disappointment in their voice and the anger. And the problem with the anger is that, well, where do you go with this anger? We had to learn lessons during this time. You see, because that, as a Christian especially, God wants us to be continually willing to grow and to learn. In spite of the circumstances, He wants us to be willing to grow and to learn. And I believe that there were a lot of people who struggled, and there were a lot of people who grew. They grew. I have a takeaway from it, my biggest takeaway. My biggest takeaway. Everybody needs somebody. And nothing can replace connection. And Judy and I spent our time connecting with as many people as we possibly could in all the various forms that were available. And what we spent a lot of our time doing was encouraging. Because I could see it in faces and I could hear it in voices that people were in despair. They were discouraged. They were fed up. And we had to listen to this because we had to help them to get to the next level. See, God, in the Bible, He talks about the church as His family. And He talks about the members of His family as members of a body. Well, how long could the head exist without the feet? How long can we keep going on without each other? We are made to encourage and support one another, to bless one another. Paul says this in 1 Thessalonians 5 and 11. He says, therefore, encourage one another and build each other up. You hear that? Encourage one another and build each other up. That's our function in the body. Just as, in fact, you are doing. And then he told the Romans this. He said in verse 5 of chapter 15, may the God who gives endurance and encouragement give you the same attitude of mind towards each other that Christ had. You hear that? May He give you the same attitude in mind towards each other as Christ had. Our job was and is to be an encouragement for one another. And as far as takeaways from times like that, and from any discouraging or any challenging time, listen to these words. They come from the Old Testament and they can speak volumes to us. When we're going through hard times, listen to what the prophet Micah said in chapter 6. He said, and what does the Lord require of you? That's kind of a hard one, isn't it, right off the bat? I'm going through a tough time, God. Don't put any unrealistic expectations on me today. It's not fair. I had somebody say to me the other day, life isn't fair. And I looked at him and I said, you're right. It isn't. And what does the Lord require of you? In all times, He has expectations and they're realistic. This is what it is. To act justly, number one. To love mercy. And to walk humbly with God. That's the three of them right there. Very clearly laid out. To act justly. It doesn't matter what's happening to us. We cannot take it out on other people. We have to continue to act justly because they're going through rough times too. Have you ever walked into a grocery store or to some store and you notice that person is really not in a good mood? Now we have a choice. We can sort of give it back, you know. I don't want to take this. But we can stop and think, I don't know what's going on in that person's life today. It might be pretty tough. Act justly. To love mercy. I really love that one, to love mercy. To be merciful to each other. We want other people to be merciful to us sometimes, don't we? There are some times in my life when I'm not in a good mood and I'm not in a good state. And I respond very greatly when somebody is kind. Merciful. And then the last one, which is sort of the underpinning of the whole thing, and that is to walk humbly with God. Because you can't do the two without having the last. You can listen to the instructions of the Bible, but without God's help, you can't really do, especially in the tough times. and what Judy read earlier on in James 2, in James chapter 1. 3 words, because you know. Because you know. You see, when we take a little bit of time and we focus on the Bible, we know these things. And it helps us. It helps us greatly. We know what God requires. We know what God makes available. And we know that we're going to go through problems. I said earlier on, I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about that. He says, consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds. Why? Because you know that the testing of your faith develops perseverance. Now, there's a couple of things. First, there's the idea of the word whenever. Now, you notice that it didn't say if. It'd be really nice, wouldn't it, to hear these words, if you go through problems. Because then you could think, oh, good, I have a choice. You know, when you go to school, and it doesn't matter what school, if it's high school, that's high school when you start. You get electives, right, in high school? Yeah, and some of the electives are fun. Okay. But you have to understand something. Trials and tribulations is not an elective. It's a mandatory course. You're talking to one of your friends. You're going to university. Well, what are you taking as an elective? I'm taking ancient European art. Oh, that sounds really interesting. I'm also taking woodworking. Oh, that's fantastic. But you have 3 electives. What are you taking for your third? Oh, I have chosen trials and tribulations of many kinds. It's not an elective. It's not an if scenario. It's going to happen. But there's a lot of encouragement that we can get from that. There was a book written a number of years ago by Scott Peck. And the name of the book is called The Road Less Traveled. And here's a synopsis of the book. Confronting and solving problems is a painful process which most of us attempt to avoid. Avoiding resolution results, listen to this, in greater pain and in the inability to grow both mentally and spiritually. Trying to avoid the pain doesn't resolve the pain. It increases the pain. And he suggests, take the road less traveled and deal with it. In faith with God. The first sentence of his book starts off with this wonderfully encouraging statement. Life is difficult. Problems are inevitable. But that's a reality. So James says, when you encounter problems of any kind, and he says, in the Bible, Peter says, in this world you will have suffering. Don't be surprised. You can count on it. And understand this too, that problems are unpredictable. I've never planned a flat tire in my life. I should have known it was going to happen. The other day, Judy and I had the perfect problem. Uni was there too. So you have to picture this. Uni and Judy are having a coffee. Judy gets out to start my vehicle. It won't start. Judy's phone is nearly dead. She can't get in touch with me. Uni is about ready to leave. So Judy runs over. Uni gives her the phone. She phones me. I'm visiting somebody 1 block away from where Judy is. Where Judy is across the street from a garage. Now, we didn't plan on this, but it couldn't have fallen in a better way, right? I come over, I check it, and I go, it's the starter. I went over to the garage and I said, this is my vehicle, I need a starter. Oh, he said, I can fix it for you tomorrow morning. Does this happen all the time? No. Even though we fell into this problem, all the solutions presented themselves. I guarantee you it's not going to always happen like that. You're going to be stuck on the side of the road someday with no cell reception, nobody around, and you got a vehicle and it won't work. That's what he says when he uses a term. He uses the term in Greek. To fall into means to unexpectedly falling into a problem. Like when the in the story of the Good Samaritan when the traveler was unexpectedly confronted by thieves. That's the same word he uses, unexpectedly falling into problems. It's not like the traveler was going along and looked at his sundial and said, oh, 12:36, so in 12:37, I'm going to have people attack me, right? Yeah, okay, I'm ready. No, it's unexpected. That's what life is about. Problems are unexpected. Whenever you face problems of many kinds. So here's a couple of thoughts I want to leave you with. And again, I want to go back to those words of Micah. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. Okay, so that's what he wants us to do while we're in these problems. But he also wants to understand that problems will help us to grow. Problems will help us to grow. The other day, I picked up some wonderful artwork from a beautiful shop called Hidden Treasures. Does anybody know of this place? It's right on the main street there. You walk in and there's all these clay products of all different kinds, and people are encouraged to explore their inner creativity. And so I took my granddaughter there, and she chose one, and she wanted to make a little jewelry box, and she painted it all up, and she was really happy with it. And then Barb takes it, and she puts it in the kiln. You know what a kiln is? It's an oven. And it is very, very, very hot. How hot is it, Barb? Can you tell us?
1,465 degrees. That is hot.
That's hot. Pizza cooks at 400. And it comes out really good. Pottery cooks at 1,465. That's really hot. But that's what it takes to make this into a piece of art. So it takes this piece of clay and it hardens it, makes it durable, makes it resilient, and then it takes the paint and it really brings it to life. I couldn't believe the colors when I saw it. That's what happens to a piece of clay when it's put under pressure. Can you imagine what God can do in our lives? If we allow Him to help us through the problems that we have to deal with, how we're going to come out on the end of all this? He's going to take this rough person, rough around the edges, and He's going to make something really beautiful. That's His promise to us. Because you know that not only God tells us to get ready for it, not only God says, here's what is required of you, but because you know that God will walk alongside you through any situation you have to deal with, He's going to help you. Because you know, it makes all the difference in the world, doesn't it? God is real, God is good, and God can help us. In spite of the pain. I'm going to, just in closing, share this one story, because I love this story. You don't mind? This is the story I call, He Didn't Give Up. Okay. This person by the name of Brian. Brian had been in the military for a while. And after his military service, of course, he's working. But in the military, he'd seen a lot of really serious problems he had to deal with. But Brian had a day to remember. A day to remember. Brian got up first thing in the morning to get ready to a flooded apartment. The pipes in the apartment above had burst, and there was water all over his apartment. So he phoned the landlord to say, I've got a problem here, what should I do? The landlord said, well, we'll help you with this, but could you go out and rent a machine to help to soak up all of the water? And he said, then we'll come in and help you. Okay, so Brian ran down to his car, had a flat tire. So he changed his tire. He didn't give up yet. Then he ran back upstairs to phone one of his friends to come over to help him while he's going through all of this. When he picked up the phone, these are the old phones, okay, just so you know, they were actually attached to the wall, and they had long cords. When he picked up the phone, he got a severe electrical shock, and he ripped the phone off the wall and landed on his keister. But he didn't give up. While he's picking himself up, his friend shows up but can't open the door because the door is jammed because of the water. So the door kicks down the door. But he doesn't give up. He goes out to get into his car to rent the machine. Somebody stole his car. Fortunately, it didn't have a lot of gas. So he walked a few blocks and he found his car. But he had to push it to the gas station to get fuel for his car. But he didn't give up. That evening, after they clean up the mess as much as possible, he had determined that he was going to go to a military ceremony at the university that he attended. But he injured himself when his friend threw his bayonet from the rifle to the driver's seat, and Brian sat on it. He had to go to the hospital to get stitches in an embarrassing place, but he didn't give up. When he got home, he opened up, no, he didn't open, he walked through the doorway, slipped on the carpet, landed on his tailbone, and severely injured himself again. He was talking to a friend the next day, and he said, I had the feeling all day long somebody was trying to kill me, but they kept missing the mark. But he didn't give up. He didn't give up. That's what God wants us to remember. Don't give up. Don't get too discouraged when you face problems of many kinds. They're going to come. But God is always there. And He will help us.